Representative Walsh will be answering questions that I will be reading to him after his initial talk on this topic. Those questions were submitted by those who registered to attend the webinar. And then for those people who have already raised your hands, we'll be answering questions at the end of the webinar for those people that have their hands raised. But again, you can lower your hand for right now. We won't be doing that until the very end of the webinar. And also just a quick apology that we won't be able to get to everybody's question who submitted one, who registered for the webinar. We'll be answering as many as we can. This should last for about 30 to 45 minutes max. So that doesn't allow for us to answer everybody's question. And with that, I'm going to introduce Representative Jim Walsh, who is going to share with you a little bit about the start of the virtual legislative session and about current legislative proposals to limit the governor's emergency powers. Go ahead, Representative Walsh.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks everybody for showing up here at this lunch hour town hall. This is kind of new technology, a new approach. We're using some of the same, all of the same Zoom virtual meeting technology that the legislature in Washington is using now for most of our meetings. And one of the sort of side benefits to using this for the legislative process is we can use it for outreach and talking to people. I believe this is the first time any legislators actually tried to use this platform to do one of these meetings. So please bear with us if there are some quirks along the way. We're doing something new. As most of you know, the legislative session in Olympia, the regular session started this week, started on Monday. And we are working largely through a platform like this, through electronic meetings. This is controversial. Some people, including me in Olympia, thought we should have done more work to meet in person more, recognizing the familiar public health safeguards, masks and distancing. I still felt that we could have done more in Olympia at the Capitol under the dome. And we are going to continue to push for that. The rules that we operate under for the House and the Senate and the legislature are always adjustable. They can be renegotiated on the fly as we go. And I'm hoping that in the days and weeks ahead, we may be able to work on more of a hybrid, a mixed format where some people can Zoom into the meetings, but the people who are well and inclined can be present in person in Olympia. I think that's important. And more importantly than that is that all of you, that the people of Washington can access the Capitol directly and in person. I think that's equally important, maybe more important than the legislature's showing up. So we're working in this world. It's not one we particularly like, but it's what we have right now. And the first issue that we're dealing with in substance is this matter of the governor's emergency powers, his ability or her ability to declare an emergency, and then using proclamations, which are essentially like executive orders, basically unchecked, to run the state government indefinitely. The worst of it, really, from a constitutional and just a kind of fairness and fair politics, transparent politics perspective, was what we've lived through for the past 9 months. The legislature in Olympia is, of course, a part-time legislature. That means while we individual legislators are working year-round, there's actually only a limited legislative session. About a third of the year we're in session. The rest of the time we are working in our districts and our communities developing bills, developing budget policy that we take to Olympia when we're in session. What happened for most of 2020 was after that regular session stopped, when it completed in March, the legislature didn't have the chance to have a voice, to be involved in the policy that the governor was making by himself under the cover of a declared emergency. Now, this is legal in the narrow sense of legal, in that state law, particularly our revised Code of Washington, RCW, Chapter 43, if you want to look it up, gives the governor extraordinary powers during a time of declared emergency. And some of the laws, most of it's in that Chapter 43 subsections in there. Some of it's spread around. There are some sections of RCW 42 which also address the issue. And relevant to the health emergency that COVID outbreak was, some of the health issues are described in RCW Chapter 77. So there are bits of a couple of chapters of state law, but the bulk of it is in that RCW 43. So it is, strictly speaking, legal what the governor has done, but I believe his actions violated constitutional language, state constitutional language, that requires a Republican form of government, for one thing, that's small r Republican, and describes the separation of powers between the different branches of government. You'll remember I hope your high school civics classes. Three branches of government: executive in the state, that's the governor and the other department heads; legislative in the state, that's the state legislature and state senate; and judicial, the state courts. I believe that despite the language of the law on emergency powers under a declaration of emergency, you still have to keep that balance of powers. The constitutional description of the nature of our government in the state isn't controlled by statute. Remember, Constitution is the highest level of law, statute just under that, and then administrative code and actions under that. So the law around emergencies and emergency powers doesn't limit the constitutional description of balance of powers. And I'm afraid that in his enthusiasm to be active about COVID response, the governor trampled on constitutional separation of powers. So what we've got in Olympia right now is a couple of bills that are being reviewed and worked around and going through the process in Olympia that would restore that constitutional balance of powers. We also have a couple of bills and actions that are going the opposite direction, that are doubling or tripling down on what the governor's been doing here and making the constitutional issues worse. Starting with the good stuff, there are a number of bills that have been proposed and properly submitted for review and process that would restore the balance of power. My own bill, which is House Bill HB 1029, really is the bright line bill. It restores the proper balance of power and limits the governor's discretion under emergency powers to 14 days for his declaration of emergency. Currently, a declaration of emergency has no time limit. It goes on as long as the circumstances of the emergency are still in place, and that's at the governor's discretion to decide that. So 1029 would put a 14-day limit on the declaration and a 14-day limit on any proclamation or action that the governor might make under the proclamation. Currently, some of his actions under an emergency declaration, some of the proclamations are time limited, some are not. The current time limit that exists is 30 days. And in all of these cases, when the time happens, when that time limit is reached, the governor can extend the action but the governor would have to go to the legislature and get approval. And in my bill, a letter from a few legislators won't do it. It would have to be a vote of the entire legislature. So the governor would, if the legislature were not in session, would have to call an emergency session, a special session of the legislature to get that permission to continue. So 1029 is probably the clearest line, brightest line reform. There are a couple of other reforms coming out of the state Senate. Senator Linda Wilson has Senate Bill 5039, that takes a similar approach to 1029, is a little more flexible, allows the governor a little more flexibility, also allows the governor more time. Senator Wilson's time limit is 30 days, not 14 days. In addition to Senator Wilson's bill, my colleague over back in the House again, Representative Brad Klippert, has a couple of bills that limit the governor's extraordinary actions and powers. And he has Bill 1020, which is very similar to Senator Wilson's bill. It takes some of the reforms that my bill does, but it also uses a 30-day time limit. And Representative Klippert also has House Bill 1013. So he has two, 1020 and 1013. And 1013 puts a 120-day limit on any proclamation. So that one's a little more narrowly focused just on proclamations. These bills are all working their way through the process. Senator Wilson's bill has bipartisan support in the Senate, so it may go quickly. My bill and Representative Klippert's bill, a couple of them have some bipartisan support, but a couple of them are not. They only have Republican support, so it may be a little harder to get them through. What we would like to see happen is whatever the vehicle is, and they use that term, the vehicle in Olympia, for the bill most likely to proceed. Whatever the vehicle ends up being, we just want to make sure that the good language sort of from each of these bills is incorporated by amendment into the bill that goes forward. And I'm open to that process and looking forward to it. On the con side, on the negative side, there's a Senate resolution that was recently passed through the state Senate and will probably get to the House tomorrow, Friday, that extends all of the governor's current proclamations under the COVID emergency declaration indefinitely, allows the proclamations to go with no legislative voice as long as the governor decides that they need to go. And there was a heated debate in the Senate over that. It ended up passing narrowly. And I expect there'll be a heated debate in the House when it comes to the House. And it's a bad idea. I don't think that the legislature should give up its voice and its ability to be a check and balance against the executive branch. I think we need to retain that, and we do not need to allow the existing proclamations to go on indefinitely. So that's kind of the state of play right now on the various bills to either reform and limit the governor's extraordinary powers under a declared emergency, or in one case, extend them. I'm going to turn to Kelly again for some of your specific questions.
Yeah, Representative Walsh, there's a lot of questions here, but one I have seen repeated and I've heard several times is, why did the Four Corners keep allowing Inslee to proclaim all of these extensions? And could you give some insight into the process and what Republicans did during the interim as the governor kept issuing restrictions on businesses and other restrictions?
Sure. The current law allows the governor to declare the state of emergency, and there's no time limit on that. And I always say, imagine declaring a state of emergency like the key that opens a toolbox. So the governor declares the state of emergency, that opens a special toolbox of a bunch of things the governor can do. Some of them are money related. It sometimes allows the governor to channel resources, state money to certain places. But to our conversation here in the last year or so, it wasn't so much about the money, it was about policy. And some of those tools in the emergency toolkit are these proclamations, emergency proclamations, that are in form like executive orders, except they're more powerful because when the legislature is not in session to either accept or reject the proclamations, they proceed. They are not law, and that's important to point out, but they proceed kind of with the authority of law. And the governor used them very aggressively through most of 2020 to do all the things we've seen, to shut down certain industries, to force people to stay in their homes or try to, and to do many things, not all of them good. What we have, the proclamations, those tools in the toolkit that open with the emergency declaration, the proclamations fall into two categories. One is proclamations that specifically waive or modify existing law. That's category one. And category two is proclamations of a more general sort that are general prohibitions on activities or behaviors. According to the RCW, the proclamations that waive or modify a specific existing law are subject to legislative review and approval, and the ones that don't aren't. So they are sort of not time limited either. But the ones that affect specific existing state law have a 30-day limit, and then the legislature has to either approve or reject any extension in time on those proclamations. And when the legislature is in session, it's a vote of the entire legislature. When the legislature is not in session, and again, we aren't for 2/3 of the year or more, then a so-called four corners letter will be enough to extend them for past 30 days. And the four corners means the elected caucus leaders of the Republicans and Democrats in the state House and the Republicans and the Democrats in the state Senate. So four individuals, elected leaders of those groups, sign the letter that extends some of those proclamations beyond 30 days. Personally, I would have made the argument and tried to make it that many of the governor's actions under the COVID response fit in that category that required the approval of the four corners of the legislature. However, the governor made an argument aggressively that most of his proclamations didn't require that. So the main lockdown proclamation, which was Proclamation 20-25, never received any legislative feedback at all. The ones that did require those four corner letters tended to be smaller and more technical proclamations. And again, on a point of principle, I probably would have refused to extend them. Not that they were bad ideas. In some cases, those proclamations actually were waivers of bureaucratic requirements and other things that were actually good. But on a point of principle, I would have said no, because I thought the governor was overstepping his bounds to use proclamations so aggressively. But the four elected leaders generally agreed to extend those smaller, more technical proclamations. Some they didn't agree to extend, and some they negotiated and required the governor to modify the proclamation slightly in exchange for their support. But that's how they proceeded. And I think at the beginning of 2020, early in the spring and early summer, there was still enough concern that we weren't sure how deadly COVID was going to be, that there was more support for this. I think as 2020 went on, and we went from the spring into the summer into the fall, it became clear that COVID was not as deadly as first feared, and there began to be more blowback and pushback and questioning of the governor's aggressive use of proclamations. So that's what we had there. Now the four corner letters aren't important anymore. The governor's actions are subject to review of the entire legislature.
Well, that leads me into another question that people have been asking quite a bit, and has several of the attendees also asked. Why did the legislature give the governor such what seems to be limitless power? When did that happen historically? When did the legislature approve the governor's emergency powers that we're seeing today?
It happened not in one step. As I mentioned, the laws relevant to the governor's emergency powers fall into a couple of chapters of state law, RCW, mostly chapter 43, but also 42 and 77, and even one other, 39, I think, are bits of it, but most of it's in 43. The body of law giving him these powers started, it goes back 50 years in time. Initially, it was very limited. And over the years, legislatures have added more language and more power, more options for the governor to use during a declared emergency. A lot of attention was paid to a constitutional amendment that was passed just a couple of years ago that, again, expands some of the governor's emergency powers. That recent constitutional amendment, which started out as a Senate resolution, went through the legislature, then went to the people, and the people did vote for it, focuses more on continuity of government, on the function of the state government during a time of emergency. So it wasn't something that the governor used in 2020 specific to any of his COVID actions. But I think that the fact that resolution passed into an amendment to the state constitution did embolden the governor, even though it wasn't directly connected to what he did in 2020. I think the popular support for that expansion of his emergency powers generally made him believe he could get away with a lot using his other emergency powers. And so I think it did embolden the governor. I think that our reforms, House Bill 1029, Senate Bill 5039, primarily those two, but some of the others I mentioned, if we can get them to get traction and get through, I think they would fix these problems.
One more question that a lot of people have asked, and I know you touched on it real briefly in your discussion, but has the governor technically done anything that's against the state constitution with these emergency orders, or has he stayed within those legal parameters?
That's a good question. He stayed within the narrow parameters of the RCWs related to his emergency powers. Some of his actions could be challenged, I believe, under those powers. And some legislators have tried, some individual citizens have tried. The legal challenges have not worked. So far, at least, state courts have said that he's within the narrow confines of the RCWs around his emergency powers. I think where his misstep really happened is more broadly, it's a constitutional misstep. The Constitution, state constitution, speaks to fundamental rights that Washingtonians have to gather, to be undisturbed in their personal affairs, financial affairs, your job, things like that. And it does describe the balance of power, the separation of power in state government. So I think where the governor has misstepped are on constitutional grounds. He has prohibited people from gathering in groups. He has prohibited people from working. His actions in the lockdown, I think, may have violated businesses' rights to commerce, and certainly his actions have ignored the constitutional description of a separation of powers. He is attempting to make law, and we have to keep reminding everyone that he can't do that.
So Representative Walsh, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to people who would like to raise their hand and ask a question. So if you are one of those people, I already see some hands going up. I'm going to unmute you. It might take a couple seconds. As soon as you see that you're unmuted, you can ask Representative Walsh your question. I'm going to start up here with Dina. Dina, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask Representative Walsh your question.
Hi, Representative Walsh. My name's Deanna Martinez. I'm in
hi.
Moses Lake. Hi. I guess my question is kind of a couple wrapped into one. You talked about the Senate resolution that passed yesterday. Unfortunately, I watched some of that floor debate. What can we do at this point to make sure that our voices are heard when it lands in the House for debate? And then along with that, should this resolution pass the Senate and the House, and I don't want to sound rude, what is the point of House Bill 1020 and Senate Bill 5039 if this goes, passes through the House?
Sure. Good questions, both. This Senate resolution extending the governor's proclamations, it is limited to his existing proclamations and only those that were subject to the 30-day review. So the resolution, it's a terrible resolution. It sets a bad precedent, but it is limited to certain proclamations that the governor's already made. So if it is passed, it will allow those group of proclamations, there's about 25 or 26 proclamations the governor's made that are specific to this COVID declared emergency and the COVID response. It is not a resolution that applies generally to the law or anything. So it's limited. That's a good thing because it's bad and we want bad things limited. The bills, of course, reform law. So 5039 and 1029 and 1020, these various bills are not limited by this resolution, which is fixed on just a few specific things. And if we can get the bills passed, they change law, permanently, or as permanent as anything is, and more broadly. So their big picture fixes. This resolution, bad as it is more narrowly focused.
All right, we have a question from Jeff. Jeff, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You should be able to ask your question now.
Yep, there we go. Thank you, Representative Walsh. My name is Jeff Pack. I'm one of the moderators for one of the Facebook pages that you post on often. Your news, Washington. We are pissed off about taxes stuff. So I have two questions for you. The first question is there any intent through the Republican side of the world down there to start limiting the government's the governor's strong arm tactics that he is using? Because he is using, L&I, he is using labor boards and stuff like that in order to strong arm businesses that are going against his, proclamations.
Yes, there are a couple, Jeff. Most of the initial response and bills that have already been drafted and filed or pre-filed focus on immediate relief to businesses. B&O tax holiday, trying to get some kind of financial relief, particularly focused on these unemployment insurance premiums that are blowing way up. So the focus hasn't been on reforming so far the governor's ability to use L&I or the Liquor and Cannabis Board as his enforcement mechanisms for proclamations that local law enforcement, the sheriffs, don't want to enforce because they don't think they're constitutional. So most of the focus so far has been on financial relief, but both of the main emergency powers reform bills do limit his ability to use agencies to enforce that. And Representative Clippert's other bill, that is his 1013, which limits proclamations to 120 days, would in its nature limit the ability of the governor to use state agencies as enforcement mechanisms. Now we've discussed, but haven't dropped a bill yet that specifically does what you suggest, Jeff, which is specifically limit the ability of the governor to use state agencies as enforcement mechanisms for emergency proclamations. But we've discussed that, and one of us, either Rep. Clifford or I, or one of the other, maybe Rep. Young, one of the more constitutionally minded reps, is probably going to drop a bill that is focused on that narrow channel. That bill would say that the governor cannot specifically order or require a state agency to enforce particulars of an emergency proclamation that is not directly connected to that state agency's statutory role and responsibilities. It's going to be tough to get that one through, but we will run it.
Now we're going to go to Patricia. Patricia, I'm going to go ahead and enable your question. Go ahead, Patricia. Oh, there she is. Patricia, are you there?
Can you hear us, Patricia? Can you hear us?
Maybe not.
Technology.
Okay. David, go ahead and ask your question of Representative Walsh.
You're muted, David.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Now we can, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Hey, well, thank you for your efforts, by the way, for small business owners like myself. I wanted to know, what are your takes on the landlord-tenant situations?
Yeah.
I know quite a few of my customers, I'm an insurance agent, quite a few of my customers are people that have 1 or 2 rental properties. And these are not the large conglomerates that people think when they think of this, rich landlord. And so they may not have relief coming to them as far as they're concerned. What are your thoughts on this? And is there any hunger towards the legislative side to try to find relief for the small landlords out there?
Yes, great question. I mean, this is a major issue. So the governor has created a situation with these moratorium on evictions. Landlords can't evict tenants. And it's again, like so many of these COVID issues, it started out with more popular support early in 2020, these moratorium. But as the time has gone on, as the year has passed, as we're into a new year, there's less popular support for them than ever. And I should say, in my conversations with landlords in our district, in the 19th district, the story I hear is that through the first few months, the eviction moratorium didn't have much of a bad effect. People were still basically paying their rent on time, and most do. But that as time went on, and as we got into the fall of last year and into this new year, landlords started to see the number of people not paying their rent increase. So time has been a damaging factor there. Now, under the current proclamation, landlords still cannot evict, and that's going to go on forward a few months into this year. So far, it might go longer, and all this is doing is basically delaying an inevitable reckoning, because at some point the moratorium is going to be lifted, and the moratorium has never waived or forgiven rents. They're due. So when and if the moratorium is ever lifted, there's going to be a huge backlog of rents that are due very quickly, and it's going to cause a great hardship. Now, as I said, the landlords in our area have told me that initially they weren't suffering too bad. They were still collecting their rents at a favorable rate. That's starting to get worse. That situation is starting to erode. Some people are stopping to pay their rent, and they're telling their landlords that they don't have to pay the rent because there's a moratorium. So there are systems, excuse me, in our state government that are designed for relief in these situations. There is a program for landlord relief, property owner relief, not just landlords, that are negatively affected by situations like this, but there's no money. There's a system, but there's no funding in it. So one of the things that we're going to try to do in this budget negotiation, which is happening right now, is we're going to try to get more funding put into that existing program for property owner relief if they've been negatively affected by the governor's actions in response to COVID. So we have a program in place for doing that. We just need to put the money in it in order for money to get out to individuals. So we'll fight to do that, to get that program funded. But really the main thing we need to do is we need to lift the moratorium, and we need to allow individual landlords, whether small operators or large, to negotiate, some sort of repayment schedule with their tenants, so we can get people paying their rent again and back on track. And we need to emphasize that we need to restore some of these property owners' rights to manage their properties. If you take away the right to manage their property, the properties are going to become damaged, worn and torn, and the property owner's ability to maintain it, either by regular maintenance or by kicking out a tenant who's damaging the property, the property owner, the landlords, need to have those rights back. And we've suspended that all for going on a year now, and that's enough time. We need to give property owners their rights back.
Representative Walsh, we have a question from Greg. Greg, go ahead.
Hi, Jim. Greg King here.
Greg, hi.
How you doing? Usually I'm talking to you about fishery stuff, but I have a few pressing issues. The Republican Party or conservatives in Washington State, you're going to hold the governor to account for his, I'll say it, bumbling of the Summer of Love in Seattle, and his failure to call in the National Guard and take a stand on this thing, because it's kind of scary when we have these groups in Portland, we have these groups in Seattle. They could spring up anywhere. They spring up up and down the I-5 corridor, and they've threatened to burn the Hamilton side and Applebyne, and it's unfortunate, but it's a public safety issue when the governor does not put these fires out. So I just want to know if the Republican Party is going to hold him accountable for some of these things he's done.
Definitely. The good thing we have, Greg, in the 19th in Southwest Washington, we have very good sheriffs. And when some politically partisan groups were threatening to burn down the Hamilton sign there by I-5, the sheriff, Rob Snaza there in Lewis County, was right on it, and they weren't going to allow that to happen. His crew, his deputies are very sharp, very proactive. And the same is true for the other counties in Southwest Washington. We are blessed to have some really good constitutional, common sense sheriffs and law enforcement officers, a bunch of good chiefs of police in our area too. And we haven't had the problems that frankly King County has had with some police conduct. Every police force has issues like this from time to time, but we really have been blessed. Our law enforcement agencies in our part of the state are professionally run. They hold their men and women to a very high standard of professional behavior, and they do a good job. So I'm not worried about us in the 19th so much. I am worried about some of the governor's, well, not even really his actions as much as his rhetoric. His words, his actions, and his rhetoric all around what happened in Seattle with the Chaz Chop thing there. I mean, he's basically made a fool of himself on that issue by at first pretending he didn't know what it was, and then saying he did know what it was, and then saying he was going to send in National Guard but unarmed, and then trying to walk back that. I mean, he's really just sort of screwed that up. So I don't think we need to hammer him on those points as much as we need to hold him to consistency and really not allow him to be a hypocrite on his approach to law enforcement. We see it right now in Olympia. With some legitimate concerns about the safety and security of the Capitol, some exaggerated concerns about it, but some legitimate, he decisively brought in gates and built a wall around the Capitol, the buildings, brought in National Guard who are armed, and amped up the state patrol, which normally is security at the Capitol, very aggressively. So his actions show that he understands what good law enforcement is. He just applies it selectively. And his befuddled absent-mindedness about the Chaz Chop situation was an act. I mean, it was a political theater thing for him. Where we really need to hold him to account and to bring up all the things you mentioned, Greg, is in dealing with some bills that are coming through the legislature on police reform. Now, some of these bills are well-intended. They want to hold the police departments in our state to the kind of high professional standard that we have in our part of the state, and that's fine. But some of them, frankly, are political grandstanding and just kind of ill-advised, defund the police type stuff. That is a few lawmakers pandering to their base. And so when those bills come up for review, either in committee in the early stages, or if they get to a floor vote, which I don't think many of them will, but some may, that's where we need to use the governor's shoddy rhetoric and inconsistent actions to a good end, which is to call attention to the bad policy around defunding the police. So basically, Greg, we're going to hold that card and we're going to use it. I'm going to use it when those defund the police type policy points come up for debate.
Hey, Representative Walsh, we probably only have time for one or two more questions.
Sure.
So I'm going to go to Patty. Patty, you should be able to ask Representative Walsh your question now. Hello, Patty. Patty, are you there? All right, we'll go
You're sort of clicking on and off muted, Patty. Try one more time.
All right, Patty, sorry about that. Let's go to Aaron.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yeah, we can hear you.
There's Aaron.
Excellent. Thank you so much for taking my call. Thank you for doing this for him. We appreciate it so much. So it recently came to my attention just today. I know someone in the correctional facilities in the state of Washington. And what he told me today was that the inmate population will all be receiving the relief checks. And so fundamentally, I completely disagree with that. I thought they were stimulus and also business. Well, actually, I'm a business owner. My husband and I are a small restaurant. And so you can imagine.
Well, God bless you, Aaron. You've been through a lot.
Yeah, he's been carrying quite a load there. Anyway, I know that on any incoming money to the prison population is usually taxed at quite a high rate. I am wondering, with that incoming tax to the state revenue, what are the plans for using that?
Okay, a lot to unpack there. Prisoners are, they may, each individual is different. A prisoner may be able to receive those stimulus check monies for various reasons. I don't know about each one. I can't make a general statement, but certainly some of them may get them. Maybe many of them will receive them. That money is primarily, of course, federal money coming in, and probably what will take up the bulk of that money, if it comes to any incarcerated individual, is to legal financial obligations. Most incarcerated individuals have some form of those obligations called LFOs, which are designed to repay court costs related with their criminal actions, and also some restitution to victims if there are victims. So I imagine most of any sort of money like that that would come to their accounts would go to service their LFO obligations. But I'll say this, Aaron, there is a trend, and we just had a hearing earlier today on a bill that would restore felons' voting rights sooner. In this state, felons who are incarcerated in prison can't vote. But when a felon gets out of prison, there is a process by which they can apply for, and in most cases, receive their right to vote back. And that's a good thing. Our state is a little more progressive on this matter than some, and I believe that a felon who's turned his or her life around does deserve to get their franchise back, their vote back. But currently in the state, there's a process for doing that. Not everyone who just steps out of prison gets their vote right back. They have to finish their parole, if any, and they have to show they're making payments on those LFOs, those financial obligations. Now, they don't have to have paid them off, but they have to show that they're making progress on that and are following a plan to repay them. And I think that's a pretty good standard. The bill we heard this morning would allow felons the right to vote again immediately when they got out of prison, even if they're still on parole and even if they haven't paid their financial obligations back. And I'm not very keen on that. I think the way we do it right now is okay. To your question about will there be a benefit to the state and taxes taken out of those payments, there will be a benefit to the state, a small benefit to the state on that front, probably. Certainly if the individual uses any of the money to buy anything with a sales tax attached to it. But the primary benefit to the state would be, I hope that those monies would be used to pay the legal financial obligations that the prisoners have.
All right, Representative Walsh, I think this is going to be our last question for the day from Miranda. Miranda, go ahead and ask Representative Walsh a question. Hey, Miranda, are you there?
Not muted.
Yeah. All right, we're going to try Jason. Go ahead, Jason.
Representative Walsh, thank you.
Sure.
I've watched you for a long time and I appreciate it. And I want to send a message to the legislators that we should all stop and think about over care facilities. There are people, the most vulnerable elderly people, who have not seen their spouses. We've separated families. How long are we going to do this? This is no different than interning the Japanese. Do you understand that? This is no different. And nobody cares. I have a 90-year-old man who has not been able to touch his wife in a year. How would you feel? How long would you put up with it before you say enough? I think we should all be ashamed of ourselves, and the governor should be ashamed of himself and what he's doing, because history is going to remember him. Like we remember the people when we did this to the Japanese. I don't think any of us agree with that. It was wrong, but they did it for the best of intentions. And this is how we're going to be remembered in this time. And people are going to say, why did they not stand up? Why did they say no? Why did they not say no? I don't know how to say no any differently. And I've heard you say no repeatedly. But this is the message I would like you to take to the legislators and ask them if they're going to look at their spouses and say, I'd be fine with you being locked up for a year for no reason for your safety. Because I don't think any of us would be okay with that. I don't think the governor would be okay with locking his wife up for a year. But maybe he would. Maybe I'm wrong. That's what I'd like to leave this with, is that's what we're fighting for. That's what we're fighting against. I think we're on the right side. Thank you.
I can't top that, Jason. You're right on the mark. Another situation where in the early stages of the COVID outbreak response, it looked like that was the right thing to do. As time has worn on, those draconian restrictions on visiting people in nursing homes have just, I mean, they're not appropriate. They're not proportional to the risk. It's part of a lot of bad stuff that's happening for nursing homes and assisted living facilities, Jason. It's not just these proclamations restricting family visit, there's a lot of financial stuff going on where the governor and the state bureaucracy is putting a financial squeeze on nursing homes and assisted living facilities in our state. And I've been fighting for a while to update and modify the kind of formulas that the state uses to determine how much Medicaid money, how many Medicaid dollars can go to pay for the daily rate at a nursing home or assisted living facility. We use a lot of very complex and frankly out-of-date systems for calculating those payments. And if we modified them, if we made them more timely, I think we would boost them a little bit and we would help these facilities. My concern is that this governor basically wants to put a squeeze on privately owned and operated nursing homes and assisted living facilities with a goal toward basically making those facilities all state run. And I don't think that's a good way to go. I think we have a system with our Medicaid benefit programs that can be effective for funding nursing homes and assisted living facilities. But we're choosing to kind of squeeze these facilities, put them in financial hardship, and I think there's a long-term play at effect there to try to make it a crisis. The old saying among the left, "Don't let a crisis go to waste," to try to create a crisis in those facilities that would have to be solved with more state ownership and control. And I'm not for that. I think that the benefit that people have in Medicare and Medicaid can work if it's just streamlined and updated and literally made less complex so that the daily reimbursement rate at those facilities is feasible for running the facility. So there's more effect. Jason, I don't mean to change the subject. I mean, you were very articulate, and I think you kind of said the last word on this proclamation that limited family access to people living in nursing homes or similar facilities. It's wrong. It made sense maybe for a short period of time, but it doesn't make sense anymore. And those visits should be allowed, recognizing the familiar health practices. But I'm also concerned about the long-term financial effects of those facilities. Their health is in danger. Fiscal health, financial health is in danger.
Representative Walsh, we're going to have to sign off. So Deborah, Jan, sorry we didn't get to your questions today, but I know that there's a lot of people out there that are concerned about this virtual session and staying in contact with you and the work that you're doing at the legislature and with other legislators as well. Can you share how people could get in contact with you if they have a follow-up question or would just like to talk to you in general about what's happening this session?
Sure, you can reach me a bunch of ways. The easiest way is probably through email. And my email, legislative email, is just jim.walsh@leg, L-E-G, looks like leg, .wa, W-A for Washington, .gov, G-O-V for government. Jim Walsh, jim.walsh@leg.wa.gov. You can call my office at 360-786-7806. Again, that's 360-786-7806. I'm on social media. You can follow me on Facebook. You can follow me on MeWe. I was on Parler, but Parler's gone away. I was on Twitter, but Twitter is also not as useful as it used to be. But Facebook and MeWe are still operating. And you can also go to my website. I have an official website. That's representativejimwalsh.com. A big long word, but it'll get you to the website. And we'll try this again. Thank you all for showing up to this Zoom town hall. And as I said at the start, we are kind of working the bugs out on this. It's new technology, and I'm sorry for those who tried to ask a question but couldn't hear you. But we will continue to do this and work the kinks out and and then maybe we can kind of grow this process as we go along. But this is a bit of a silver lining to the fact that we're meeting online. If we can come away doing this regularly, I think it'll be a good thing. But I still want to get back on the floor, and I really think we need to get back to our normal business in Olympia.
Thank you, Representative Walsh, and thank you to everybody that participated in today's webinar. Please be sure to check your emails for future updates with links to webinars with Representative Jim Walsh. Have a great day.
Bye-bye, everybody.